All right. Okay, so like I said, this is the first Lunch and Learn of 2025. We're so glad that you're here. I know it's not a big crowd, and that's okay. We are recording, and so you can pass this on and share with your colleagues if they want the information. And of course, the hub, which Chelsea just put that link in for us, has all the resources and information there for you as well. And so we'll keep watching as people are joining. And I know today is probably the first day back for most of you. So we appreciate you being here and taking a few minutes out of your day to join us. So today is all about integrating technology into stations in your classroom for effective student engagement. And I think that's something that we all strive for. So we're going to talk a little bit about why you might have stations, how to run those stations, what you're going to put in those stations, and then just some things that will help you be effective in using stations in your classroom. Sounds like a whole lot for 30 minutes, so we're going to see if we can get through all that. But remember, all the information is on this hub for you. So, can you still see my screen? Yes. Okay, good deal. I lost my little green line around it. Can you see the hub, Chelsea?
Yeah, we see the site right now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, just making sure. Normally it has my little green line around there and I don't see it. So that's okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why we would use stations in the classroom and why stations are such a good thing. First, I want to clarify that we're talking every grade level here. K through 12 can be using stations. I know sometimes we think of it as an elementary strategy, and our elementary teachers tend to be rock stars at using that, but this works all the way up through 12. And I'll attest it can actually work in post-secondary as well. So stations are just a way to deliver content in smaller chunks and smaller groups. So let's start with this first, and then I'll kind of pull in some of the studies and the research here. Start with, what do you think the benefits of using stations in the classroom are? What are some of those benefits? You can either hop off mute if you'd like to talk. If you would prefer just to jot it in the chat, we would love for you to contribute to today's session a little bit. What are the benefits of using stations, or what do you see as the benefits of using stations in the classroom? Awesome. Thank you, Diane. Student choice. Definitely chunking it into smaller pieces. We know that chunking is an incredibly important part of direct instruction in the classroom. It's how we move our knowledge from short-term to long-term in those chunks and those pieces. Anybody want to add anything else? All right. Over here on this site, yes, great for mini lessons. I love mini lessons. That is definitely, I got to thinking about that the other day and just how effective that can be to teach it in small pieces so that our brains can make those connections and move things into long-term memory. So some of the other benefits that we know that stations can do, it allows for what's called multimodal learning. And that's the statistic that I have up on that site. A recent study looked at 183 studies over 6 decades and to reveal that learning through multiple modalities has a big impact on retention. So basically, the more modalities that you can use, the better. And stations allow for those different modalities. You can have a mix of types of stations in your classroom, and it helps our brains retain that information longer. And so that is one thing I want to point out, that even though we're talking instructional tech, we're not saying everything has to be technology. We're talking about using technology alongside some of these other strategies that we know work. So things like physical movement, getting your kids, letting your kids have a few minutes to move up and around the classroom, and even if it's just through the rotation part of stations, is an important part. They need to move. You can also differentiate using stations, and we know that that's a huge piece. Is not all of our students are at the same place in their learning at the same time, and so being able to adjust your groups so that you can adjust their learning and not just hear me when I say this, we are not grouping them at the beginning of the year and leaving them there. We're talking about grouping them based on what they need at that moment. Allowing collaboration. Collaboration is one of those 21st century soft skills that we think about that employers are really looking for in new hires. And so we need to start building that. So secondary teachers, this is where you can really build in collaboration in your classroom. It also allows for small group instruction. What a great time to pull in that small group of people who didn't understand a certain concept, a piece of the learning, to pull them aside and talk through what their misconceptions were, where the misunderstanding took place, what steps they're missing. It does allow for student choice. Obviously, if you can provide that choice in some different settings, it's a great place to do that. It allows for direct instruction. Sometimes direct instruction gets a bad rap. We think of it as a lecture or that Charlie Brown, Walt Watt teacher at the front of the room. But guys, direct instruction is so important. It is the key to how we get knowledge to our students. And so doing that in a small group setting is even more valuable. It allows for that chunking that we've talked about, which is part of the direct instruction process. It also allows, though, for some progress monitoring. What a great way to be able to see your students making progress in small pieces and know exactly where they are at the time. And of course, engagement. When students are getting to do different kinds of activities, you're hitting all those different ways that students prefer to learn. And we're going to talk about some of those in just a second. Um, and so let's go ahead and Chelsea, I think you should be able to share if you want to swap over and share your screen so that you can talk a little bit about the how behind this. So, we know that stations are so important. Let's talk about what that might look like in the classroom.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to take a moment to go over some different ways that you can structure stations when you're running them in your classroom. So this TCEA blog post is fantastic. If you click it, it'll take you to this really kind of in-depth description of why you might try stations themselves, as well as some different frameworks. But I really love the image that he has all the way at the bottom. So I'm just going to switch over to that to make it a little bit bigger. So when we look at different frameworks. The first one that you can consider is fixed time frameworks, which is you set that timer, students complete the work within that amount of time, and then they're going to switch to the next station. So that's definitely one that's good for someone who's not as comfortable with straight stations and prefers things to be very predictable. So that's a great way to kind of dip your toe in for stations. And some different positives for that or that differentiation piece or the flexible rotation, sorry. So the flexible rotations is that idea of students complete a task and then they move on to the next station, or they move to an open station, depending on the situation. And so students are able to work at their own pace. If you have a student who finished before the timer on a fixed station, what do they do? If you have students who didn't complete the station within the amount of time on your fixed station, what are they, how do they finish the work? So this allows for more of that differentiation that I mentioned for students who they need a little more time or a little less time, they can adjust in that way. And then the third type is that choice-based rotation. So this one works really well with choice boards where students are going to be working through different tasks, but they're going to be choosing what those tasks might look like, as long as they're all kind of aligned to the same standard and testing the students' knowledge in the same ways. So I'm going to take a quick second to jump back to our site. So again, that's all kind of listed out in this TCEA blog post, but I've provided a link down here. If I know for me personally, as a middle school teacher, I never thought stations would work in a middle school classroom. It's just there's too many students, it's too much to organize. And so I thought and went into kind of this mindset of, well, let's just try a smaller chunk. So the idea of this or that is so I've got this shared for you. At the very top is a video about how to build these different templates. But the beautiful thing is there's 40 already built for you. So if you want to share this with your teachers, they can take any one of these templates, copy it into a new slide deck, and just use that. They don't have to build it from scratch. But just to show you a couple different ways that you could do this or that, it's that idea of, well, I can read the chapter or I can listen to the chapter. I can complete a story cube or I can do an Edu Protocol 8 parts. And so this is, again, it's that stations idea of moving to different tasks, but they're only given two choices. And that kind of gives them less overwhelm as well as the teacher for your first try with stations or with choice boards, less overwhelmed. So I would really recommend someone who's not so sure to kind of start with this idea. But there are a lot of different ways that you can structure it. just to show you a couple different ones. So maybe with this one, obviously, we're not going to be able to complete all of these tasks. So maybe you tell the students you need to complete four different boxes, and then they have a choice between each one. So that's one way that you can do that. And there's a lot of other styles down here at the bottom as well. All right, to hop back over to this final link over here from Ditch That Textbook, I absolutely love Ditch That Textbook. Matt Miller, he is one of those people that I don't know where he gets all that energy, but man, he puts out great stuff constantly. So if you're not on his newsletter, I would definitely recommend signing up for that. But the great thing about this link is that, like I mentioned, as a middle school teacher, I wasn't so sure what stations might look like in my classroom. And the beautiful thing about this article is he's got not only elementary, but also high school. What could it look like in high school? As well as middle school. And this is kind of an interactive where you can click on the different stations for this exemplar of what you might be doing at different stations in a middle school class. And then again, with elementary, we know it's more common, but if you've got a new teacher or you're wanting to help your teachers embed that technology piece into their elementary stations, this is a great place to look because they've got both online and offline options for each of these stations. And then he's got some more resources down below. Christy's going to talk about some of them with you in a moment, but just some great tips there. One of the ones I really liked was was having a variety of stations. This one gives you a nice list of ideas. So there's a lot of different resources. I'm not going to read it to you, but you do have access to that link. So take a moment to explore that if you're wanting to help a teacher or if you're a teacher yourself wanting to embed stations into your classroom. So that's kind of different ways the stations could look while happening in the classroom. But the next question in my head is, well, what is the station going to cover? What is the content that we're going to be learning about in the stations? So if you don't mind, could we try again with typing in the chat? What content would you think could be included in stations? Feel free to unmute or just throw it in the chat. Library skills. I love it, Diane. That's a great one.
And that could include so much, right? I mean, that
Hmm.
could be research skills, that can be parts of
Hmm.
a book, text features. There's so much that could go with that.
All right, and I'll just kind of show you some ideas that Christy came up with that I thought were really awesome. So building background knowledge, that idea of um, students can't manipulate the information and really process it unless they've gotten that baseline of learning that information. Vocabulary, practicing writing in smaller chunks, providing exemplars for them to look at with mentor texts, and then review games is another activity that students could be doing in their stations. So, like Christy mentioned at the beginning, stations can be online, but they can also be offline. And I always use kind of a combination. I taught social studies, so I didn't get to use stations quite as often as I wanted to because a lot of social studies is linear. So, needing to start at a certain point and end at a certain point. But when I did geography, we could do it for that,
Mhm.
or world cultures class where you're teaching all the components like government, economics. Each of these could be their own station. And I think a lot of other subjects really lend themselves well to that idea. But I say all that to say that when I did stations, I might have a physical piece of paper mapping station, and then I'd have
Mhm.
a flashcard station or a review game, and then I'd also have an online ed puzzle, and then they'd have another online activity. So having that blend of online and offline was really powerful for me in that middle school setting. So I would definitely encourage you to kind of blend those together. And
Yeah.
I'm going to switch it back over to Christy so she can talk a little
Yes.
about those task cards.
Share. All right. Let me replace that share and hopefully that cooperates here. Uh, let me,
That's good.
okay. There we go. Yep. Good deal. So, and I love my type A heart needs kind of some structure. So I would love the idea of taking some of those things and having stations that kind of stay in place. In other words, there's always one that reviews. There's always a vocabulary. There's always a game because I could easily substitute in the content knowing what the structure is. And that's just my kind of type A-ness that would need some categories um, there. Doesn't mean you have to by any means. Some people switch them up all the time, but I would need to kind of know that, certain things are happening. So when you're looking at that site and you're thinking about what content you can include, um, I found these a little efficient teach. That's hard to say, but these task cards, they are crowdsourced. In other words, teachers have contributed to this file. It's a view only file, but you can make a copy and manipulate it. They do recommend that you keep the link available because they are adding to it. So, but these station rotation cards already have the instructions and they can, again, if you make your own copy, you can edit them if needed, but it tells you what the directions are, what you'll need, and what grade level, and whether or not it's offline, online, or a blended model. And so there's everything from using Flipgrid at a station to like a rolling, like a dice type game where you're writing with certain kind of characters and characteristics. But there's also vocabulary um, games, where it just says very generically, read and set up the game. So you would have to put the game in, but you would know that that station is a game. So it'd be a lot easier to kind of find and create. You can have your teacher directed one. You can have a reading station, a listening center, all these things that, and I love that they put 3 through 5 on here, but let's be honest, people love audiobooks for a reason. So a listening center could happen at any age level. They also have experiments, card sorts. Card sorts are an amazing way for kids to engage with the content and the vocabulary concepts. It's also a great way to review and make connections. But there's all these different ones that fit in here. The station directions are pretty generic, and then you would fill in the content. But I wanted to point out this one, and I'm going to provide you with a template as well. This hexagonal thinking is one of my absolute favorite strategies right now because it's all about building connections. Chelsea mentioned that building background piece. Students have to have that kind of content to connect knowledge to. What we know about the brain is that our brains learn based on similarities. Our brains store information with what's alike, but we pull out and recall information based on how things are different. And so hexagonal thinking allows students to make those connections. How are things connected? How are they alike? So that when it's time to recall, they can do that. And so if you go back to the site, this hexagonal
Christy,
thinking Canvas, yes.
I'm so sorry. I wanted to just point out one
Oh,
thing about those task cards that's really,
yes,
really helpful. Notice
yes.
that if you finish early, like I
Oh,
mentioned, that if you have those set times, sometimes students get done early, and then that can cause a classroom management problem. So I absolutely love that every single one of these has some
yes.
kind of extension activity suggested at the bottom.
Thank you for pointing that out. I do love that as well as the fact that it has the what you'll need, so you'll know your supplies as well. So I think these cards just really kind of keep in mind not just how we're going to do the stations, but what we need to make it run efficiently as well. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so the hexagonal thinking, I created just a template. I'm going to pull over to my actual one so you can see it here. It's just a whiteboard. If you've never used Canva, Canva is free K through 12. It's a great way you can share it with a link in classroom or however you prefer to do that, whatever your kind of mode is. But hexagonal thinking is just that. It's asking students to make connections. And I love the hexagon because it allows for multiple connections. And so what you can do is, students could, maybe you're studying the water cycle. So they would look for a picture of rain. They could take and put that picture in one of the hexagons, and then they would connect it to something else. So, you would just keep connecting it. And the key here is that when you make that connection, so like you want to connect it, then you would explain how the two are connected. Now, they could do it with numbers like this one, the example is, or they could do it right on that little piece of space between the two. But they can move this around and, becomes a little map of sorts. They can make all sorts of connections. I just love it. I love it for a lot of reasons. They could actually create this themselves and put the pictures in, or you could put the pictures in yourself and let them connect. So there's like layers to how this could look. maybe one group gets one of these where the pictures aren't filled in, and maybe another group gets one where they are filled in. Or maybe you've provided some of the connections and, for certain students. And that's the beauty of small groups is you could actually have different groups doing similar but different activities. They're making the connections, but maybe you're scaffolding in some of the concepts you want them to get. So I love that part of stations is you really can add that differentiation piece. But anyway, that template is there for you. If you want to use it, feel free. Like I said, you could put the pictures in yourself, or you could have your students do that themselves as well. Um, but those rotation task cards are there for you as well. Feel free to use those too. Another tool. So, okay, now we know why we're doing it. We know how we're going to kind of run a station. We even know kind of what we want each station to be. There's a lot of logistics that go into running stations. So, Chelsea mentioned that classroom management piece has to be pretty strong to run this. So, you can baby step your way in with maybe some choice boards, things like that, to kind of get the process going. But when it comes to actually how do you form the groups, how do you assign the groups, there are some great tools out there. So this first one is called Teacher Stack, and this one is one that's fairly new to me. But as I was playing around with it, I realized how effective it can be. Because what it allows you to do is you can import your students in. Now, since I don't actually have students, I just had ChatGPT make me a little fake, fictional students list with their first name, last name, birthday. I was able to import them in using a CSV. And so I have 25 students in this particular class. Then I can go to the station rotations tool, and it allows me to decide how many groups do I want and what are my stations going to be. I can set the transition music. I can set a timer. Don't have to though. So like if you wanted to do more of a flexible group and you just wanted them to start off, you could totally change that. But I came up with, the idea, let's have a game in one, some independent practice, a review station, a real world application station, some direct instruction, and maybe a computer program. Maybe we're using Eureka Math or Prodigy or I don't know, something along those lines where your students need to log into something. So you have this all created, and then all you do is run that day. And it's pretty cool because there's our little transition time. It will keep track of the time for each station as well as where we are in that rotation. Plus, it does your grouping. Now, as far as the grouping, you can set it or you can let it set it. So in this case, I told it just to auto assign, but I can actually reset this and I could say, you know what, today I need these students to be in group one because I want to meet with them first. We need to go over this concept. And so you can actually kind of pre-assign some things that if you want to, or you can just say, auto assign. It doesn't matter as long as everybody gets to every station, and you can do that. So I thought that was really a handy piece of this. In the same way, you can also do the same thing with the stations themselves. So if you wanted to start with a certain group, maybe your direct instruction, section, you could do that so that you ensure that you're differentiating that instruction for them. But I thought this tool was pretty robust. And we have a couple more for you. Chelsea, do we have time for Flippity? You want to talk Flippity real quick?
Yes, I think I can
Okay.
make it
I'll
work.
let you
So,
I'll let you
uh,
share away.
perfect. Okay. So for Flippity, this is one I used a lot in my classroom for the grouping purposes because I would have 25 to 30 students in each class, and just the building of groups was a lot of time. So if you've never used Flippity before or you haven't come by and looked at it recently, it's got a lot of new resources added. So I just wanted to show that real quick because this could be a station as well. This could be one of your interactive digital stations. But in order to use the grouping feature, I'm going to point you to the random name picker because it does a lot more than just spin the wheel. Up here at the top, if you wanted to say you need your groups to stay small, so you want groups of 3, you just click on it and it creates your groups for you. But you know what? Jake and Robert are not good together. We don't want them in the same group. You can switch it up. You can adjust this however you want to. You can also say, okay, I have 5 stations. I need 5 groups. So you can change it to 5 teams, which that ended up being the same way, but say we had 3 stations. It's going to put the right number of students in each one. Another thing that's kind of neat is if you click more over here on the right side, you've got a chart. So that could be a seating chart. If you wanted to create a seating chart for your classroom, you're set up in rows. You can adjust how many rows and columns you have on that. I did that a lot myself as well. And then another one is single name. So that's another way you can do randomized name picking. So that idea of the students who always raise their hand, this is a way to kind of get around that. I always had my really eager students and then my really quiet students, and this allowed me to kind of keep everybody engaged. And it's a little quicker than the spinner because the spinner takes like 2 or 3 seconds to stop, but you can just kind of go through your kiddos that way. It's also got a timer feature. It also has a spot where you can type in instructions. So if you want to keep this up on the board to remind students who their groups are, it'll all be available for you in one place. You can also shuffle if you wanted to mix up the groups quickly, and then a complete reset. So again, Flippity's got a ton, but I love the random name picker myself to save time for that randomized piece as well as building my groups and then just small adjustments. The other one that we wanted to shout out is Classroom Screen, and I'll make it very quick. So if you go to the main website, you can see kind of what a classroom screen can do. So it's got different widgets down at the bottom that you can add. You can pull them around and make it look the way you'd like it to. Then if you go down a little bit, it's got different ideas of different things you can do if you've never heard of Classroom Screen before. But I really liked that they have these templates and they're free. There is a paid version, but there is all of these templates are free. So one of the ones I found was groups. So I just put in random students just like Chrissy did, and it built my groups for me. I could have adjusted those, changed all of these colors. It's got materials here for you. You can do the red light, green light, yellow light for what are you allowed to do physically with that classroom management. If you want them to work in silence independently, if you want them to quietly ask a neighbor, or if, like we said in these groups, probably going to be doing a lot of collaboration. You've got that timer feature and you've all these other widget options. So if you wanted to do a quick poll, things like that. And it's all of the different templates and widgets at the bottom are included for free. So definitely something to explore. I like starting from a template rather than building from scratch. I feel like it saves a lot of time. And there are a ton of different classroom screen options. But that's a great way for you to build your groups and then manage with that time piece. If you're doing a fixed model where you're doing, 10 minutes and move on, 10 minutes and move on, you've got all that built in automatically. And the last thing that we wanted to shout out before our 30 minutes is up is that we do have some more resources down here. Catlin Tucker, blended learning is her jam. So she really does do that mix of online and offline really well. And then Holly Clark also we have some resources there that you can explore for that digital learning stations piece. Christy, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, that's it. And that's perfect because it is 11:59. So we did it. But
We really
we will
covered a
stick around.
lot.
We did. We covered a lot and I love it. But no, I think, stations are just one of those things that maybe start small, but maybe that's a goal you
Mhm.
want for this year. So I think that would be
Yes.
a great place to start to add some engagement, just keeping in mind that it doesn't all have to be technology, that there's a balance that needs to be had in our classrooms, I think. So